Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Let's try that again. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Excellent, excellent. And welcome to the Unlocking the Promise of AI, Practical Lessons for the CFO. My name is Trevor Thomas, and I have the privilege of leading our growth efforts at the firm. I serve as our Chief Growth Officer, and I am absolutely delighted to have Marie Myers with us today.
Thank you, Trevor.
She serves as the CFO of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. From an approach perspective, what we want to do is a couple of things. One is I want to give Marie an opportunity to give some context in terms of her background and how the series of experiences that she has led us to this conversation today. And then from there, we'll spend about 20 or so minutes in prepared questions that we'll go back and forth on, and then give you an opportunity to ask questions for another 20, 25 minutes, and then we'll wrap up in five minutes to close out on the hour. Sounds good?
Great. Yeah.
Excellent. With that, Marie, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Thanks very much, Trevor. So perhaps a little known fact is we're both from Houston, Texas.
Yes, we are.
So
Go Texans.
Yeah, we're doing really well on the weather over here. But as you can tell, I'm definitely not Texan by birth, but I'm Australian. And I've had a few CFO roles in my career, but I've had the pleasure actually of working with Trevor for over a decade. In fact, he and I were sort of on the tag team when we split the company. I've been with HPE on and off for almost 3 decades, done a variety of roles, but Trevor and I had the privilege of working together through the split, and then actually we've worked through a lot of different projects over the course of a decade. So
fun times, I tell you.
Yeah, it's been a privilege and great to be here today to talk about AI. I mean, who would have ever thought a decade ago this is where we'd be?
Indeed, indeed. Well, given that introduction, starting with a practical example, because as we all know, we've heard so many headlines around the topic, but one of the things that I was really encouraged about this conversation is that you made it real for HPE. And so let's talk about the problem that you were trying to solve and the catalyst that drove to leading this to a transformation.
Sure, absolutely. So I think there's just tons of, I think the world is all driven around AI now. No, driving in early today, you can see all the billboards. I think everybody's primed to have some deep conversations. What I was looking for, Trevor, was like a real practical solution to some of the bigger problems that we've got to solve in the company. And we had one specific problem, which was, one of many, I might add, but it was really around, we have a process, which I think most companies probably have, where we review the operational performance of the company on a weekly basis. And honestly, hard to say after many ERPs, of which you work with us on many of those, it's still a really manual, cumbersome process. So there's just tons of BI, business intelligence, PowerPoint, and I've got to say more than 100 plus people in the company that are involved in sort of pulling together the materials that we cover on a weekly basis. So every week on a Monday around lunchtime, a group of executives sort of sit together and we cover the operational sort of performance. People work through the weekend. There are pre-meetings. It's probably one of the most cumbersome, but yet really important processes in the company. So what I was looking for was something that was enterprise-wide, that would have a real impact on the way the work gets done, and frankly, take out some of the manual work. Because what was surprising to me all these years later of all the ERP implementations we've done, we've still got tons of manual sort of work. And this is one of them. And the other thing is it's a real static process. So by the time you get to Monday, the data is usually several days old. So you're talking about information that is frankly stale, and yet it's taken people, potentially hundreds of hours to pull together, and you're not getting the most relevant information to make the best decision. So I suppose it wasn't that difficult to find this process, Trevor, to be honest with you. I decided, and also it was enterprise-wide. It wasn't something that finance was just driving. It was touching the entire sort of enterprise layer of the company. So I'd probably look for something that was pretty difficult.
Indeed. And so given that challenge, and given the advent of, Agentic AI and other forms of artificial intelligence to achieve that, solve that problem, what led you to embarking upon this? Because as we all know, right, generative AI, as an example, is less than 3 or 4 years old. But here you are coming in and want to use those types of technologies onto that challenge. So what led you to drive that to a transformation?
Well, I was looking for a way to really improve the outcomes. It was clear to me that, the current sort of modus operandi was going to be not effective. I'd been in the seat about a year and a half as a CFO, so I suppose I had the lens of, I was fortunate enough to start with somewhat of a clean slate, but it also appeared to me that we could just use Gen AI to, frankly, it was a really applicable technology for the problem that we were trying to solve. And I think that's super important. You know, Gen AI is not the sort of magic wand for everything. You have to look for the right process or the right workflow or the right business outcome and really think about how that can have the biggest impact. So to me, it was a real natural one. And a lot of the data structures were already in existence. Like, we've done a lot of work over the years of building the ERPs. We had a data platform. So it was more an opportunity to re-engineer workflow processes and take the best of both Gen AI and process transformation and really drive a better outcome.
You know, what's interesting about your comments, when I think about HPE Enterprise, you were pretty mature in leveraging the latest and greatest technologies, right? You've gone through the automation exercise. You've gone through the restructuring and shared service in low-cost jurisdictions, right? And so now here's this new opportunity, and now you're facing it head on, right? And so one of the things that we were really encouraged by is your pioneering spirit around this. And so, you know, idea to production, right? Talk to us about how did you move from the classic use case frame that we love to use all the time, from getting to a pilot and then moving to production in particular. What were some of the foundational elements? Things like data, infrastructure, platform, processes that mattered the most to your organization?
I think you probably mentioned some of the top ones. The first one was a data platform. I mean, it's really hard to embark on a journey with any kind of AI if you don't have data in the right form and you don't have data that's clean. We were fortunate that we had invested in the data infrastructure. Like you said, we've done a lot of hard work over the years at sort of I would say modernizing the back engine of our organization. So we'd had the ERPs and we'd fortunately had a data platform we could use. The second big one is process. In fact, I was just chatting with somebody earlier that, you know, there's not a lot of new stuff here. I mean, I hate to say it, but good process really matters. I mean, putting AI on bad process is a waste of time. I'm just going to tell you, don't waste your time. If you're not going to spend time really trying to re-engineer, change the process, it's just not worth it. So process was another big part of it. And the one that I know we're going to talk a bit more about later that I'm a big fan of is change management. It's the human side of AI. I think you and I have been through enough of these tech platform implementations where, you know, you've got the best platform, you do a major ERP and you find that it just doesn't transform or doesn't deliver the benefits you're looking for. Often it's related to the fact that the organization didn't spend enough time taking everybody through change management, which is really what I call the human side of change.
Yeah, for sure. And let's double click on that a bit more, right? When you think about the organizational challenges that come about with this type of change, you know, the cultural aspects, the technical aspects, the process aspects that you've mentioned. But when you know, going through the journey of looking at, in this instance, an agentic platform for the enterprise, how did you get the organization ready for this change?
Yeah, maybe I'll start out by saying I do think the impact of AI is probably one of the most profound on the workforce. It really matters. I mean, it's on everybody's mind. Is AI taking away our jobs? I have 3 teenagers. All we do talk about at home today is, you know, will you have a job when you graduate from university? I was in Australia over the Christmas time, and, you know, it's really on everybody's mind. So if you're going to start this journey, be really aware that there is fear in a lot of employees around what this journey means. So in terms of what we did with the organization, the first thing is, you know, we decided everybody needed, I said 2 years ago, a minor in AI. In 26, I'm saying you need a major in AI. So we embarked on a enterprise-wide sort of reskilling of the organization. So my organization, I have around about 3,000 people, and we built a very progressive sort of reskilling program is what I called it. And we had, you know, numerous levels that you could achieve, everything from sort of entry level for novices all the way through to fairly sophisticated levels of programming. And we have been iterative. I mean, that journey has, you know, gone on now for 24 months. So we sort of started with the foundational layer. We've continued to refine and rebuild that program. So I'd say reskilling is an absolute must-do. It's not even an option. There's just no way you're going to be able to go out into the workforce and just hire all the skills you want And it's difficult to find the right folks, and second, it's just impossible from a timing perspective to get all of that done. So reskilling was really important. The second thing is I go back to the change management piece. I mean, you've got to start the conversation about, how jobs are going to be different. And I mean, I could already see it in my organization. There's just different skills required. I mean, we approached building this platform with the Deloitte team more like building a product, which, for a finance team, that's not something that's highly intuitive. So we took what I would say a product management-led approach, which means you need different types of people in your organization. So you've got to prepare your organization in terms of understanding what AI is. Then you have to prepare your organization for different jobs, different skills. And then you also need to be mindful of the fact that some of their work is going to go away. So what are they going to do with this time? Unfortunately, most organizations are probably struggling to, they want more productivity. So it's probably not a bad answer, but you need to prepare people for the fear of change. It is such, to me, it's probably the biggest issue of success in AI.
Yeah, it's interesting, alongside the notion of change management and the things that you've depicted, how did you go through, because you were implementing this at a time where questions about accuracy loomed, trust, how can I trust the values around this? How did you navigate that within the organization?
I'd have to say it was probably the most difficult thing to do. I mean, and certain layers of the organization were slow to move and still are today. I mean, I personally, as a leader, leaned in and committed from day one. And it literally not a day goes past when I'm not talking to people in the organization or ensuring that I'm advocating for the journey we're on, because it's an iterative journey and you're going to fail at certain points. And so your organization's going to see that failure and they're going to say, hey, we should just give up now, Marie. This thing does not work. And so you're going to be prepared as a leader to continue to be the advocate. And I think, secondly, failure is okay. I mean, you have to sort of get your organization to realize that failure and iterating is part of the AI journey. It's not going to be a sort of you hit the on button and everything works perfectly the first day. I mean, what I've learned with AI is you've got to iterate through the process. So it's a different way of working and you've got to prepare the organization to go through that. And I think finally you need the staying power, Trevor. I mean, you need to stay with it because there's just so much that's been written about the POCs that people have done and then they never saw success. People didn't see the ROI, so guess what? They gave up. The numbers, depending on what you want them to look like, they're strong double-digit numbers, I think, in terms of failed AI projects.
For sure. What's interesting, and you shared with me an example around job design and how things changed. I recall a conversation that you were sharing with us around your relationship with the FP&A leader shifting. Why don't you share that story with the team?
It's a really good one. So my FP&A leader is my right hand. In fact, literally an hour ago, I was texting him nonstop about questions with the quarter, and I probably talked to him, all day, all night. There's this every 7 days a week sometimes. And so, interestingly enough, he's obviously one of the critical players in this journey. And I said to him, the great thing about this whole platform we're building, I won't need to talk to you anymore. He goes, what do you mean? I said, well, all the questions I ask you, I just ask the platform now, which I'm totally comfortable doing that. And he's like, you mean I'll be less relevant? And I'm like, well, that's not exactly what I meant, but I will just have a different relationship with you because I won't need to interrogate you constantly throughout the day on your opinions on the numbers. Because the difference with AI, like normally I get my BI layer, I get the data, I get the numbers. What's different now is I can sort of start to have much more of a sort of analytical conversation with the AI and form an opinion, which is what I used to do with him. Like I'd use him as my intellectual sparring partner to determine how we navigate, what we're doing in the company. I said, I frankly won't have to do that with you anymore. So anyway, it was an interesting conversation.
Indeed, but it shows how the organizational dynamics are shifting.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Where you as an executive can engage with the solution and only go to the most critical things to your team.
Exactly.
Around this, which I found fascinating when, as the organization started to get into this. Shifting gears a little bit, as a CFO, you have responsibilities not only to your peers in the executive, but also not into your team, but also to the board, right? You're now implementing this new technology. Share with the audience how you manage the governance conversation, for them to trust in the process and the approach that you were taking with this.
Yeah, don't underestimate governance and controls. As an ex-auditor myself, it really matters. And what gave me a sense of peace of mind, even starting this journey, was actually, I'll be honest with you, Trevor, was working with you.
Yeah.
It was working with Deloitte, because I knew that you would understand from the get-go how important it was to embed the right controls and to have the right control structure around Zuora.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't even going to be a debate, and it was for me personally. I'm a big believer. My dad always taught me you got to sleep at night. I wasn't going to be able to sleep at night as a CFO. Embarking on was probably a fairly risky journey if I didn't have somebody to partner with that I knew understood the risk that I was taking. Because it's real, and there's hallucinations, and there's a lot of things to work through here. I think the second part of the journey that was helpful, that made me feel better as a CFO, is that we decided to, embark on this journey using our own on-premise infrastructure. Something that bothered me was just the cloud, how much I'm going to park out there that other people might be, especially financial data. Operational data is sort of like the guts of your company. It's the secret sauce. So we partnered together to build this on our own private cloud infrastructure, which was on-premise. So that eliminated that risk as well. So I think we were able to work together and really identify those key risk items and find really innovative ways to work around, to work in a way that really gave us something that we'd be comfortable with. And it made me feel better as a CFO. And I'll be honest, several other CFOs have asked me point blank, how did you navigate this with such sort of positivity, given the journey you're going through?
Mm-hmm. For sure. What's interesting, you mentioned the private cloud infrastructure. From the perspective of making sure that the data integrity, you had control over it. Another interesting find, if you can share with the audience, is around the economics.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So one of the other sort of main benefits for me too was, being a CFO, you sort of think about cost. And I have some other colleagues out there, and I was chatting with one about a year ago, and he told me, Marie, you know what I've done? I've put a token counter on our enterprise access to what was their chat version inside the company. He goes, because these cloud costs are just starting to run so crazily in his company. And I shared with him the journey that we were on with our own infrastructure, because one of the benefits I also saw is the fact that I could open up the platform to most of my organization, obviously with the right security parameters, and I wouldn't have to be sort of mindful of cost. I mean, today I have a lot of SaaS platforms that I use in the company. And, the license costs I have to restrict, because I know that I just frankly don't have the affordability or the cost structure to open up those license seats to as many people as I would want to. Whereas now with this platform, I have eliminated essentially that cost structure and that cost problem. So that was another big advantage to going down this infrastructure path. And I appreciated that, you guys got it as well.
Yeah, for sure. As we get in, so let's talk about the solution. You mentioned Zuora. Which is the AI agentic platform that was used. Talk about how it got to and you've gone public in announcing 40% reduction. Now you actually have personalized it within HPE, affectionately now called Alfred.
Yeah.
Talk about that journey in terms of what does it do, how does it add value to the organization in the case of operational reporting? Yeah,
no, absolutely. So as you said, we've seen a 40% reduction in terms of just reporting sort of workloads from Alfred. We called it Alfred because it's sort of Batman's, wing person. So that was sort of like the whole idea with the platform and how we went about it. And look, what I would say, what was great, it's just like the conversation we had about the FP&A leader, is that you can actually interrogate the platform. So I always say today that AI is like the new UI. I mean, the ease at which you could actually get into the platform compared to what it's like to interrogate the BI layer it's transformational, which is why I think adoption of these types of platforms is going to ultimately become really easy for companies, unlike a lot of other prior platform implementations, because the ease of interaction is enormous. And I don't think you want to underestimate that, because a lot of the management change we've been through many platforms over the course of years, it's been difficult. A lot of people, you go and look at these licenses and you're like, well, no one's using it. What's the point of going through the implementation and then finding out half the organization's never migrated to this new workflow? So I'm optimistic that this new platform, given the ease of interrogation, it's going to be much more broadly adopted.
Got it. And speaking of adoption, so when you think about finance, right, it is the ultimate in terms of end-to-end. Every business event has some form of financial outcome. Talk about how the changes happen with your team, not only within finance, but within the other functions of the enterprise. How is that evolving from your lens?
Look, I mean, the workflow and the jobs themselves are changing. Like we talked about the FP&A chap and how different that is. I mean, just think about it down to sort of like what I call the transactional side of finance. A lot of the work that we did in AP and your sort of classic back office infrastructure, which we had offshored, as you quite rightly said. The next level was really the automation layer, which, you know, I think now you can just see that AI is absolutely going to automate a lot of that very routine transactional work. So we've sort of did the first part of the journey. We've taken a lot of that work offshore. We consolidated into centers of excellence. But what we hadn't done is actually gone through that automation layer. And so that's what I would say is sort of like the easiest layer to apply AI is really that transactional layer. And you see a lot of that work getting very quickly automated through AI. Henceforth, those jobs are changing. Those jobs, in many cases, will look different. They won't be transactional in nature. In some ways, I think it's better. A lot of these people went to university just like I did, and we did a lot of manual data entry. The first level jobs in finance were fairly manual. So entry-level jobs are going to look different. That's where I would start. And then as you sort of scale up the ladder and you go into more of the analytical jobs, you know, they're no longer just sort of looking in the rear vision mirror. Now, just like the ops call, like we get in the call. And today, you don't have to sit there and sort of agonize over the past. You can really focus on real-time data and thinking about the future, which I think is a very different paradigm for what jobs will look like. As you think about a lot of jobs in finance, were reporting jobs. It's about extracting data, putting data in a prettier form, and then, you know, having reviews and conversations. So it's going to shift to a much more analytical layer. At least that's my hope, Trevor.
Got it. As given your, you know, you've looked at operational reporting. What's next for you in terms of how you're thinking about applying this technology within the organization?
The big one, and the team knows that I'm always on them about, is forecasting. So the holy grail is getting the forecast right. And so far, the humans haven't done a great job. So probably a bit like weather forecasting. They don't get that right either. But what I'm hoping is that AI will really make a difference to our forecast. You know, the ambition I have is to sort of run the AI layer in addition to the human layer and sort of do them simultaneously and really see how they pan out. But I'm hoping with the experience we've had here that we can really apply that now to the forecasting part of our workload, which is, honestly, it's sort of like the bullseye target.
Indeed. And before we open it up for questions for the audience, one last question for you. So, you know, wonderful finance story around how you're applying AI, and one of the nuances that you made that I want to amplify, it's not just generative AI. You're in your commentary, you mentioned automation features, you mentioned machine learning features, you mentioned inferencing features. All of those technologies are coming together in a way to drive an outcome. And in this case, it was in operational reporting, and now you're taking it forward. When you talk to your peers within the organization, and they see what you've done in finance, how are they viewing it? Are they skeptical? Are they, you know, open to embracing things like this? What's your take?
Yeah, look, I'd start out by saying I think the CFO today's role is, AI is changing the role of the CFO too. I think in some ways you're the economic steward of AI. I mean, you're there to ensure that the benefits and the returns of this capital investment make sense. But moreover, I tried to use myself actually in some ways as a bit of a guinea pig for the company, because I figured I was also helping to drive a lot of the transformation efforts in the company. So it was important for me to have a win here so that I could sort of push the rest of the company. And you know, that exactly happened. So what was really good is I was able to sort of use this example then to encourage other leaders around the table to take some bold steps. And so now, for example, our head of supply chain is in the middle of a major customer service reinvention. Our head of marketing has done the same thing. So the conversations were probably a little harder to get started, but you know, by me undertaking this effort, I think it showed the company that it could be done, that there is taking bold chances in a way that is sort of managed well from a risk perspective can pay off. And so it became much easier to have that sort of impact on other aspects of the company.
Excellent. And with that as a backdrop, open it up for questions. Yes, there's a microphone coming.
Hello, thank you very much for sharing your journey. Now I'm asking you, as a CFO, have you already started really, you spoke about controls and the necessity of starting putting guardrail on Gen AI. Have you started trying to measure the risk-adjusted ROI once you take into account also the investment into these controls, not only in your journey to apply AI in the CFO activities, but also for the overall company, as I think going forward, this will be a big part of what a CFO should advise the company on?
Absolutely. Look, I would say, as I mentioned earlier, I think the CFO in some ways has to create that economic framework for, AI evaluation for the company. In terms of the journey we've been on at HPE, I mean, I looked at AI in terms of both, kind of break it up into two categories. Direct impact, which is usually something you can measure in terms of productivity. We talked about clear productivity returns, but then I also look for indirect benefits. And the big one we haven't actually spoken about is actually the speed of decision making. So in that operational example that we talked about, one other benefit that perhaps we should have spent a moment on is the speed.
Yeah.
Because the speed piece is actually sometimes much more impactful, perhaps difficult sometimes to put an exact number than the direct benefit. And I think what's super important as you go through this journey is you've got to make sure you capture both. I think there's been a lot of, say, perhaps failed POCs, failed use cases, because folks potentially focus just on those very linear sort of productivity metrics. Hey, how much did I get in terms of just better productivity, as opposed to looking at a lot of those indirect benefits as well. And I think that's why you've got to have a scorecard that looks at both. Otherwise, you sort of miss half of the win. Then I'd say there's another aspect to all of this, which is getting started. The price tag of getting started has an investment, and then that should scale over time. And there's a price tag to doing nothing. There's also the distance factor. Like, the sooner you start, you go through the pain of the initial sort of growing stages of understanding how to go through an AI journey. You can start to build more and more momentum, and you can leverage that investment dollar across the organization. So as I started simultaneously, for example, this ops review, I also went through a process of sort of seeding the entire organizations with smaller sort of bespoke use cases. And that allowed me to sort of leverage some of the investment I'd made in new roles across the organization. So, but then I talked to other CFOs that haven't even started. And so there is I'd say I'm probably a good couple of years ahead of some of my peers who haven't reskilled. Reskilling takes time. So to answer your question, I think I'm a big believer that you've got to make some of that upfront investment. You may not see the return in 12 months. It may be 24, 36 months before you see some of those other incremental returns. And make sure you look at direct and indirect benefits.
Yes.
Hi, Andrea Olson. I'm a computational neuroscience student at Caltech and an early stage founder in medical tech. I'm interested in the AI adoption aspect. So earlier in your talk, you explained that you had a lot of training for employees, and I'm wondering, how do you make sure that it's not just a KPI that they have to check box and they kind of do the minimum that's required? How do you really train them and show them that they can trust this technology and implement it?
Yeah, there's no point training people if they don't use it. So, what we did was actually, first of all, we gamified the training, so made it fun so people would actually, what we really drove through the training was practical use of the technologies. And I would say technologies, to Trevor's point, we also use quite heavily RPA technology. So we're able to look at this much more from a sort of suite of capabilities. Yeah. And what we did was we gamified that whole process. So as you were training, you were implementing and then getting rewards around your implementation. And that is sort of like the secret sauce. You've got to make that sort of wheel work. Otherwise, there's no point in training people if they don't know how to use it or they're not experimenting. And honestly, you need to come back and keep retraining people. Right now we're going through a fairly aggressive adoption of a lot of co-pilot capabilities. And so we're constantly training the organization and improving and building off the skills that we've built. So you really have to make this a continuum. It's not a one and done type thing. And then the other piece, you've got to link it to actual practical implementation and rewarding people for having success in implementation.
Two other things to the comments. Completely agree with what you said, Marie. In the experience with HPE that we observed, one is there was a point in time when they believed in the solution. When they compared the results of what Alpha provided to what they manually did, and they saw how fast it was able to generate that, there was a shift in the thinking around this, one. And then two, Marie was using it. And if Marie is using it, I might want to understand what's going on with it myself. Yeah. And so those two factors, in addition to the training and the set of things that the organization did, led to that adoption around that as well. Yes?
Hi, I'm Angus Wilson. I'm a CFO for a construction company in Saudi Arabia, and we're embarking on something probably not quite as ambitious. But what intrigued me is you obviously had the support of Deloitte. How internally did you structure your resources to, I think, help with the change management? Because I think for me that's really critical at the moment. But then ensure the deliverability of it, because you've got interfaces with all other aspects of your organisation. And how did you think about that? What working group did you set it up, and how did you think about doing that?
Yeah, no, you need to have a cross-functional team. And so obviously IT, I kind of look at them as your right and left hand. I mean, they were a critical partner and still are through this journey, because you're going to have all kinds of, assuming you have a data platform, there's still legacy systems, et cetera. You're going to have to navigate that whole journey. And I would say they were sort of like an absolute critical partner that we work with day in, day out. The other piece is on the change management. I worked with, I drew on some of the resources in the company, but then I'll be honest with you, I found the need just to invest myself, because I knew this journey was going to be long, and we're not sort of one and done just on ops. I knew at some point I want to move into the forecasting area. So I started to actually re-engineer my own organization, and I sort of built what I call a center of excellence around AI and implementation, so that way I had those skills in my own team. And then we would draw on the enterprise where it was relevant. Like, there was a change management group in the company, so we were able to leverage some of the best practices they had. But I'll be honest, I had to invest inside my own team, because it's just such a massive commitment.
Thank you. Dirk Nowak, Managing Partner, SCI. Marie, from a CFO's perspective, you talked earlier about forecasting. Where have you seen applied AI deliver better forecasting outcomes? Not just sort of faster models, but also better decisions in terms of capital allocation, risk management, or cost controls. And the other topic around that is trust. So what prerequisites did you have to trust the initial models that you used? Thank you very much.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with the trust piece first. So trust is earned. Like, I'm a big believer that you earn trust. It's not like you're going to just fire up the model and immediately feel trust. And finance people are skeptical, let's face it. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of finance people in this audience. I mean, by heart, they're naturally pragmatic and skeptical. So trust had to be earned. And it was interesting as we were going through this journey with Deloitte, we hit on an issue that with NVIDIA that we worked through on their NIMs around the concept of determinism. And because, if you play with models today, you'll ask the model one question, and one of my guys likes to say, if you ask the model a joke, it'll tell you a joke. And if you ask the model a joke again, it'll tell you another joke. So it sort of has all realms of, you don't get exactly the same answer every time. So for finance people, in order to trust a model, you need to get the same answer every single time. So cracking determinism was a really important part of our journey, and it was one of what I call the foundation layers of building trust. And we worked through that with Deloitte and NVIDIA. So I think that was part of the development, and that was absolutely critical, because you can't have a model that gives you different answers. No one's going to use it. So that was absolutely crucial in terms of us getting there. And I'd just say overall, as we think about the organization, don't underestimate failure as well too. I'll just bring it up. We did have folks that were naysayers and just didn't want to go there, and it took time to win over that group inside the company. It's not like you're just going to go on an AI journey and everybody on your team will believe. Sometimes the hardest people to convince are the most senior people, and that was something I found is like working through that level of engagement with some of the people nearest to you is important. So you've got to find people in the company who are going to be champions and really ensure that you get some of those early wins too, and you get those folks on board. So I was lucky enough, my head of FP&A, he and I had worked, and you asked me where had we seen AI work. We've been working on this sort of skunkworks model on forecasting. So we got all the humans that are doing our forecasting model, and he and I sort of run on the side. I call it my sidecar. And we don't share that with everybody, but we use that. We've been using it the last couple of quarters to see what was right, and the model was right. The humans were making all the mistakes and judging everything, putting in layers of judgment constantly. But the sidecar that we were using was getting to exactly the right answer, which gave me more confidence that we knew that pushing the organization to a forecasting model was the right thing to do. Now, look, I've tried many times through my career. You know, I was an ex-economist and I love regression, so I've been trying to build models all through my career. So this has been like the holy grail. Sometime before I retire, I want to build a forecasting model that works. So, yeah, the sidecar project was good. We kept that quiet. We didn't tell the whole team about it because we knew that they would feel lack of trust. So trust is a big issue as you go through this journey.
I think there was a question in the front. Yes.
Thank you very much. Mark Müller-Eberstein, investor from Seattle. I did work at HPE in the 90s, so we were kind of colleagues at that time.
There you go.
You touched a little bit on the transformation of the workforce, of course, and on the numbers. You mentioned 10 to 20% productivity improving. We have some companies, smaller companies in our portfolio that basically already cut 80% of the workforce.
Exactly.
So the larger companies move a little slower than smaller ones. What does it mean for the employees over the next 2, 3 to 10 years?
That's a tough one. You know, where I have a teenage daughter that's going into business administration, and I'm like, oh, you better understand AI. You know, look, I was an early RPA, robotics process automation user, one of the earliest ones in the United States. And interestingly, at the time, if I wind the clock back about 9 years ago, we were having this exact conversation about RPA. All these jobs were going to go away, right? We were going to eliminate hundreds of jobs because a lot of the sort of traditional work that was being done, particularly in, you know, BPO, was going to be eliminated. Well, here we are, I suppose you could say almost a decade later, and those jobs are still there. The jobs look different. So will there be work that will go away? Absolutely. I think we have to be prepared that, you know, a lot of work is going to get automated. So jobs are going to look different. Does that mean there are less jobs? I don't have the magic sort of crystal ball answer for you there. But what I would say is there's going to be new jobs. And if I think about, are they going to offset, is there going to be a net loss to the economy? I think that's what we have to wait and see. But what I would say is that on RPA, it didn't really happen. I think the fear we all had that those jobs would disappear, never come back, never really turned out to be true. But we did automate a lot of work. We did reduce a lot of errors and we improved controls. But different jobs emerged and we used that capacity to invest in other areas. So I am somewhat optimistic that we'll go on a similar path, but I think this time around the impact of automation will be far greater on AI than ever was with RPA.
An example of the new jobs, you know, was around agentic orchestration, right? With the release of Alfred to the organization, there's now a library of agents. How do you manage them? A new tool comes into the organization. How do you make sure it's integrated and make sure that everything flows? And so, to Marie's point, things are shifting around this. And so I completely agree with the argument around with the advent of new technologies come new responsibilities that you have to understand and use that workforce to drive that. Yes.
Hi, Mustafa Hammam.
Microphone for you.
Hi, Mustafa Hammam. I lead data and growth in a MENA region fintech super app. How do I get to convince my organization that now is the time to maybe pause in an environment that's valuation-based and net profit-based and growth-based? How do we make that kind of shift of we're chasing numbers, we're chasing profits, we're chasing customers, and maybe we can slow down and put that kind of investment, and that itself will take us further later on?
I think like this gentleman said earlier, I mean, you're probably going to get, you know, some significant savings and some productivity improvements if you can make this investment. I think the other piece is just sort of, you're going to have to put it on paper and be able to articulate your business case. Otherwise, it's probably going to be pretty hard to distract your current strategy that you're on. But I think there's a big fear of missing out factor too. If you don't start to take work now and really apply Gen AI, later on it's going to be harder to get going, and your competitors all around you have got to have already started that journey. I mean, I've had the luxury of working with some companies in the United States, and I've seen, you know, there's one company I work with where I sat down with them, I took my whole team through this presentation where this company had literally a $10 billion business, and they had completely radically transformed the financial management of that business. Today, there was like one CFO and 60 agents running that business. And I sat down, my staff were just, blown away, right? We have about, say, 40 billion in revenue. And I said, imagine a situation where, say, a quarter of that revenue is run by one person and just a handful of agents. It was just really hard to sort of imagine what that future would look like. So maybe one thing to do is just sort of take your team through, that journey. Like imagine, and these are real cases that are out there today where there are companies that have gone through this journey. There's not many, but they've completely reimagined their work. And that I got to tell you, that was fairly motivational.
Other questions?
Hi, Jessica Fries, Exec Chair of A4S. So we do a lot of work with the CFO community, but also investors, particularly asset owners. And you touched a little bit on some of the workforce implications from the rollout. Can you touch a little bit more about some of the broader sustainable business implications, and particularly how, for positive impact or potentially mitigating some of the negative impacts of such a large application of AI has on your business? So how are you really applying their technology to further those sustainable business goals?
Yeah, no, look, I'd say from a sustainable business perspective, definitely the AI, and I'm going to talk about it from an operational perspective, which is why I think you're going. Look, I would say definitely in terms of now getting Alfred up and going from the operating perspective, it's given us now a much more predictable way to actually manage the business, a lot more forward thinking and less sort of time spent, looking at the past. I think a lot of time, particularly in business, is spent sort of drawing and mulling over the past as being able to understand the future, which is why I'm so fascinated by the ability to actually build forecasting models, because I think that's where the real value in AI comes into the enterprise. And then I think there's just also, in terms of some of the negatives and that you wanted me to highlight, I think it does shift some of the roles. Like you do, as Trevor hit on, you need different roles in the company to maintain those models. It's not like those models just stay fresh and relevant without any sort of input. So you need to shift your focus around understanding how those models are interacting with other agents in the company, et cetera. And I'd say that that's an emerging area that you've got to put time and investment into. So you're going to have to rebalance some of your internal investments.
Other questions? So I have another one for you, Marie. So when you, reflect on this journey, if there was a word that would characterize the experience that the organization has gone through, what would that word be to date? And why?
It's a tough one there, Trevor.
I got to give you a little,
Yeah.
Keep it interesting,
I think I'd say enlightening.
Okay. Say more.
Well, I think we hit on the trust factor here, the skepticism, just because, we're all finance, a lot of finance people are naturally like that. I think it was just enlightening in the sense of what is possible.
Yeah.
I think folks, if you can't imagine, like I used that example of the one person managing a $10 billion business, it's kind of hard to imagine that this could really be true.
Yes. Got it.
And I think folks started to really get confident that the way we've all worked for decades could be fundamentally different.
Yeah.
And it's just hard to imagine it because you're just so used to processes and ways of working that have been very predictable in a company for a very long time and haven't been they haven't experienced this level of disruption.
It's interesting when you were talking about that, it reminded me of a scenario within the project where the Alfred has the capability of referencing the source systems of which the analysis has come from. And so as part of this change management exercise, this enlightening term, which I love, they would double click. Okay, where did this come from? And so they would double click, triple click, and say, oh, yeah, if this and that came together, I could see how it gets to this out. And so enlightenment came throughout the conversation, which I think helped with change management. Before I wrap up, I want to make sure that we cover any other questions. Yes?
Sorry, so Marie, you're chatting about implementing in your team down when do you think the day comes your CEO walks in and goes, you know, have you seen Alfred 2? You know, we don't need a CFO anymore. When do you think that day comes?
Personally, I can't wait for that day. Actually, I'm looking forward to it. So, look, I don't think there's one of the things we haven't talked about. I believe there's a role for the human, right? I think that's what you're asking me is like, when is the human gonna?
Yeah.
I always say human in the loop. You kind of need a human to sort of validate, verify. Maybe I'm still pretty old-fashioned and hoping there's still a role for me here, but I think the role of the CFO will change. You know, you're no longer going to be, that's why I sort of hinted at that earlier, you're no longer, like I think a lot of CFOs kind of carried their career being the purveyor of the numbers. I mean, today, you know, my CEO looks at the numbers anyways, right? We talked earlier, he's like, hey, blah, 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 blah. You know, I just saw that on the system. And so I think the role has to change because there's a shift in skills.
For sure. I mean, not only just the strategic skills, but understanding having an appreciation of the technology that's navigating this. I think for the executives of the future, having both the strategic sense as well as a level of understanding. You don't have to have a PhD in technology, but you have to have some level of understanding of how these things interact. Yeah, for sure.
But I would say the CFO today needs to be not just, I mean, I was fortunate enough in my career, I've run IT, cybersecurity, I've worked in an RPA company, so I had a fair bit of technical, you know, had enough technology background to be, how do I say, relevant. I think to Trevor's point, you can no longer just be the custodian of the numbers. You know, that's a single digit, that's sort of like a career that's got a fixed sort of expiration date, in my opinion.
Indeed. Any last questions before I recap? Going once, going twice. Sold. Excellent. So this conversation was about lessons. Hopefully you heard some, but some of them that came to me out of this discussion. One is around data is key. As you're embarking upon this exercise, don't forget the process because it will shift as a result of these technologies. Change management, huge in terms of how you navigate the reskilling aspect of the workforce, how the jobs will shift as a result, how you drive adoption were all lessons that Marie shared with us. This notion of people having a major in AI as a frame is an interesting concept. One thing that was implied in the conversation, but I'll just make it explicit, you need to have what I call a pioneer sponsor. Marie was that for her organization. Someone who was out in front and is senior enough and withstand all of the skepticism that could take place during this exercise and still push through. Having the courage of doing that is not easy, but having that type of pioneer sponsor. And then the notion of benefits, both direct and indirect, that come through this exercise when you think about the return on this investment, I think were all valuable lessons around this. And so with that, if you can join me in thanking Marie for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Trevor.
Yes, you got it.